Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining the Wisconsin Cheesemakers Association for this afternoon's webinar. I'm Rebecca Sweeney, and I work as Communications, Education, and Policy Director for WCMA. Joining me from WCMA today are Executive Director John Umhafer and my colleague in Communications, Education, and Policy, Ellie Herman. Ellie, give a wave. All right. She'll be helping out throughout this webinar. During this challenging period, WCMA has endeavored to provide important information and practical resources via our member newsletters and member bulletins, as well as webinars like this one, so that we could support your uninterrupted operations. Today, we are focused on Wisconsin Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection, or DATCP, inspection protocols and regulatory flexibilities amid the continuing COVID-19 pandemic. Let's take a look at today's agenda. Today we'll have DATCP Bureau of Food and Recreational Businesses Division of Food and Recreational Safety Manager Tim Anderson presenting. He's going to be detailing regulatory flexibilities and those inspection protocols. He's also going to be fielding some questions and answers, specifically about timing and sealing services and inspection debit flexibility secured from the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the Food and Drug Administration. After his presentation, and we'll let him go all the way through his presentation, we'll then have some time for questions and answers. We did have pre-submitted questions prior to the webinar that we're certain to cover. We may also have time to cover some of your questions in a moment. And we'd like you all to submit those via the chat, which you'll see toward the center bottom of your screen right now. Please take note that everyone will be able to see your questions. If you pose them to everyone, you can also select to send them specifically to me if you'd like them to be private. I will not be announcing member names or companies when I pose those questions. Finally, today we'll close with a look at some industry resources, with a special focus on the Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection's new dairy site. For the moment, it's my pleasure to introduce someone who has been a real defender of ongoing dairy operations in the state of Wisconsin and an excellent regulator and communicator. Tim Anderson, please take it away.
All right. Well, thank you. I appreciate the time to present on our COVID response and also talk about the requests for flexibility we're doing. This has been a very challenging year. It's tested all of us. And I wanted to start, today we asked to basically record the presentation because I was worried about my connection issues in a rural area. Probably many of you have those same issues. So we recorded it. It's new for us here at DATCP to try and record messages and present them. So I appreciate the opportunity today, and we've already started learning on it. You'll see there's a few things that glitches in the presentation later. But one of the things, after I taped it, John asked that I present on basically the Dairy Rules Advisory Committee. I presented to them back in early November, and he actually wanted me to provide that same message to you all. And so we recorded it, and afterwards I looked back and I was watching it, and I realized that a couple of the terminology and some of the history I wanted to touch on, and I wanted to go back to April when the COVID epidemic started. And if you all remember, we were basically pulled out of the field. DATCP, we had governor's orders, all state personnel were pulled out of the field. We did have our food and dairy technical specialists deemed essential, and they stayed out doing those time and seal work and reseal work. So one thing that we had to do is when we're not in the field in our dairy program, we're not meeting the pasteurized milk ordinance expectations or standards. And that can cause milk issues for moving out of the state, interstate shipment, and even overseas shipments. And so we were tasked at figuring out what we could do to meet regulatory requirements. In the PMO, there is a requirement that allows for states to ask for flexibility. So when you see the term flexibility, that's what it means, is it's a statement in the PMO that allows us to say what's going on and what we're going to request flexibility from. And in that request, in April, we actually requested that we stop inspecting all dairy plants, grade A. And so this is all right now grade A in the PMO world. I think everybody's aware of that. But we stopped all quarterly inspections, all water samples, all farm inspections, tankers, everything. What that also meant was we also had to stop doing all licensing activities, personal licenses. So there was a rush a little bit for, geez, we need pasteurizer operators, or I need a bulk milkware sampler new license. And so we had to deal with some of those. And so when you hear the taped version later, I'm going to talk about flexibility, and most of that was for the PMO standards. And when we asked for that flexibility request, some things we were allowed to just skip. If it was a quarterly inspection and we were going to do 2 or 3 more inspections in the same year, we were allowed to just skip them. Other things like our farm inspections, because we don't follow the PMO, we have our own rule. We actually had to make up all those farm inspections. And then any survey or laboratory evaluation work we had to follow up and make up as well. So just to give you a little bit of reason why I talk about flexibility, that's what I'm talking about. It's a PMO requirement. And we've actually written 4 requests this year, maybe 5. One was very, very narrow. But we can write them. These requests can be very narrow and say, we want to request missing 3 inspections in a specific county on a specific month. So those requests can be fairly straightforward and very tight, or it can say we're going to stop all inspections in the state. And then we just have to list out what we're actually missing, and it's documented. And so far, FDA has allowed or accepted all the requests, I think, in the country. So just to get everybody teed up and ready for the taped presentation. Rebecca, any questions, or did that help? Maybe.
No, I think that's a great overview. And as a reminder, folks, if you have any questions about anything you hear in this presentation, just go ahead and leave those in the chat down below, and we'll make sure that those get answered. The video itself runs about 13 minutes, covers a lot of important information, so please stick with us, and then we'll get into some questions right after that. Ellie, without further ado.
Good afternoon. This presentation was originally presented to the Dairy Rules Advisory Committee on November 4th. Because of its relevance to you all, John Umhafer asked that I present it again to the Wisconsin Cheesemakers Association. We appreciate the opportunity to provide our regulatory response and do what we can to assure regulatory guidelines are met so Wisconsin dairy products can meet FDA Grade A and USDA grading standards while following CDC COVID standards for essential workers. So let's begin. Over the next few slides, I will cover the following: the Dairy Services Section's response, Governor's face covering mandate, hotspot responses, maintaining Wisconsin's Grade A program and IMS listings. First, I want to thank several associations, the Wisconsin Cheesemakers Association, Dairy Farmers of Wisconsin, and CDR for taking a strong early lead in providing a COVID response plan for positive employees at dairy plants. This was an excellent document, and we can tell when plants have adopted the plan. Unfortunately, we are finding plants that are not taking the virus seriously and are not taking precautions in plants, thus putting DATCP staff at risk. When we are contacted that a plant employee has tested positive and possibly exposed a DATCP employee, we are following the CDC guidelines, and many of the staff are self-quarantining for 14 days. We have several concerns that we are balancing. First, safety of our staff. 2, safety of plants that we inspect and your personnel, your staff. And 3, unobstructed movement of dairy products. So here's what we've done so far. We established safety measures starting back in April, May, and June. The management team established personal protective equipment and PPE procedures, procured state-issued PPE and distributed it to staff. And we're following the CDC guidelines for essential personnel. Measures that staff conduct daily self-assessments for symptoms. If they find that they have any symptoms, they report it to their supervisor and either start quarantine or go in and get tested for COVID. So we are doing all staff are doing that daily self-assessment, and if there's any symptoms, they are not going into any field work. PPE shall be worn on all inspections. Social distancing is practiced when possible. We are minimizing the number of people, or we're asking you also to minimize the number of people at the plant. We are also trying to minimize the number of people that we send in. The staff are only visiting one plant per day, and that's for full inspections. We're only going to visit one plant per day for full inspections. Virtual and food safety and when possible, we are trying to do that. We developed a dairy services section Badger bounce back plan earlier this year when we were out of the field, and we worked back into the field slowly. And as we continue to evolve, I'll talk about that plan further. Staff are calling ahead. Typically, we don't call ahead. Historically, we haven't done that. Currently, we are doing that, and part of that is to call ahead and find out what's happening at your plant. The last thing that we're doing is oftentimes we have personnel that need to go up and work in a certain area of the state, and we put them up overnight. Currently, we are limiting our overnight travel, again, to reduce possible exposures. We are not enforcing the governor's mandate. If we get to a plant and they're not wearing masks, we are not going to the sheriff's department. We're not going anywhere else to enforce that, but we need to work together to prevent the spread. As I mentioned before, a majority of plants are wearing masks, and we appreciate that and thank you. But if a plant is not having plant personnel wearing masks when we are there, we have instructed staff to ask that they put on a mask. If they don't have a mask, we will provide a mask. If they still refuse, we have instructed staff to call their supervisor and hand their phone to the personnel, and the supervisor will ask the plant person to put on PPE, or they will instruct the staff to leave. This is not the preferred route. We would like to work together to prevent the illness. Please communicate with the dairy staff if any of your staff are claiming the mask exemption. Discuss any COVID activity in the plant with the sanitarian. And if they are claiming an exemption, we're really going to try and practice social distancing, or if there's other personnel that could actually work with the sanitarian on that visit. Please limit the group size with the inspector. We need industry's assistance to keep our staff safe. As many of you heard, for a brief period in October, due to the rapid spike in COVID case counts in Brown and Outagamie counties, we suspended all regulatory activities for roughly a week. As we were putting together the Gov delivery to announce it, the spike dropped quickly, and we had already started to release staff back into the counties, so no Gov delivery was sent. This did cause confusion. As we continue to address staff safety and the response to the pandemic, our staffing and activity responses will vary due to the following. Overall case counts in the county. I think almost all counties are red. We are continuing to do the work. Inspection rates. So population density in the county, we're looking at the data online. The county, if there's any real fast spikes, we're watching those closely. When we call ahead, we're asking about how many infected staff do you have at your plant, and it's not something we're recording. We're just trying to assess safety of staff. We're looking at different facility types. Obviously, when we go to like a transfer facility, if we're looking at farms, we're outside more, low numbers of people. We're looking at the facility types and what's going on there. The goal is to complete our dairy regulatory work. We don't want to impact the milk flow in Wisconsin. We recognize the need to meet the interstate milk shipper and PMO standards so industry can maintain their IMS listings. As I've discussed at the previous meeting, we have made flexibility to FDA. At this point, every request has been accepted, including the request to halt work in Brown and Outagamie counties. After submitting the request and pausing, we did meet the work obligations for those 2 counties by the end of the month. We are taking steps to adjust the inspection or procedures to still meet the PMO and reflect the new COVID pandemic reality. Some steps we are taking include farm inspections. We are doing all farm inspections. Even on farms, we are asking staff to wear masks and practice social distancing. For haulers, when we see those haulers and the tankers on farms, we are continuing to do those inspections. And again, we're wearing masks and social distancing. For plants and intakes, we will continue to complete on time unless request for flexibility is requested. We are limiting the staff in most cases to 1 person, again, on an inspection, unless we absolutely need training or an audit to maintain staffing levels, train staff, and pasteurizer time and seal work and reseals are essential, and we will continue as long as we can work safe. And it's our goal to continue that. A couple things that we've done in the sampling area. For grade A samples, we are always looking at drug residue, Appendix N. We are looking at that procedure to minimize times staff spend in the lab. We have started a new process this month that we're piloting. I believe there's 6 staff that are working on that. And so you may see some changes a little bit to help minimize the amount of time we're in the lab, and also give us more flexibility in the future on how to schedule those visits. In high prevalence counties or plants where we are adjusting the grade A sampling procedures. In one case, we have had staff call, or when we called ahead, in one case, we actually had the facility leave the samples out in the lobby. We requested those samples and they put them out in the lobby, and we picked them up and sent them in for testing. If there is an issue with your plant and some COVID numbers, and it's discuss that with the sanitarian, and we do need to get the field supervisor's approval before doing that process. Other activities include remote training options, like the lab supervisor training was held remotely along with the exams. When possible, we are starting to review records remotely if the facility has the records available electronically. We just purchased 3 headsets to see if we can train and audit while social distancing in different parts of the plant, around the pasteurizers, in loud areas, in tight areas. We've purchased those headsets to see if that will help us maintain more social distancing. I'd like to note that I would like to note that we have been in touch with the USDA grading program. DATCP does not directly participate or contract with the USDA grading service for any regulatory activities, but we realize that the dairy plants that do participate do have their records reviewed for DATCP inspection reports and pasteurizer work. Any missed state regulatory work noted on the USDA, noted by USDA personnel, can impact a plant's USDA grading status. I have talked with Chris Thompson, and they understand the position we are in right now. If any pasteurizer work goes beyond 1 year, and none has so far, they are not going to take immediate action unless it is not the pasteurizer is not working correctly, or it's missing seals. So if the pasteurizer is working correctly and the seals are all in place, it will only be a minor debit on the USDA inspection for a missed time and seal. So we've worked with them as well to assure that we can maintain compliance if needed. To summarize, we appreciate the Wisconsin Cheesemakers Association's work to work on COVID response to positive employees. We are supporting the CDC guidelines. Our staff are self-assessing every day. We are trying to minimize our contact time and look for options to meet standard regulatory standards and do things remotely. We realize that plants that are not following the CDC guidelines are the plants that we are having safety concerns with for our staff. We continue to evolve in our responses, as well as we are trying to move in a more surgical approach to the COVID pandemic. We are trying very hard not to do countywide or statewide stop work orders, regulatory work orders. We are trying to do a very surgical approach on a high count basis. And again, this is evolving for us. As our responses to COVID continue to evolve, we will continue to communicate these changes through the Gov delivery and our website. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to present today, and I'd like to answer any questions. Thank you.
All right. I heard there that the department wants to partner with us and needs our partnership as well. Is there anything else that you wanted to stress in that presentation, Tim? You're on mute at the moment, I think.
Thank you very much. Too many mute buttons. Is that better?
Yes, I hear you loud and clear.
I think the biggest thing I want to emphasize is we really are trying to communicate with the pandemic. We're trying to get out Gov deliveries. We're trying to communicate through the Rules Advisory Committee, through presentations like this. We're really trying to make sure we communicate what's going on and also be able to listen and hear what's going on. So. All
right. Well, I think that we are ready for that portion of the program where we're going to pose some questions to you, Tim.
Sure.
Hopefully nothing too tricky here, but we did have some questions that were presented in advance of today's program. We'll get to that first one. So we have a few employees with medical conditions that prevent them from wearing a mask. What does the agency advise we do with them when an inspector arrives?
Great question. So essentially, those employees are claiming an exemption from the governor's order. And in that case, when staff call, if you're able to talk with a sanitarian when they call ahead, make them aware that there's somebody that has asked for the exemption or is claiming the exemption. And if you can, do they have to be the person with the sanitarian or the staff, DATCP staff? Are there other people that can maybe do that inspection with the sanitarian or the survey officer? If that's the person that needs to work with the regulatory person, practice a little better social distancing if possible. Maybe spend more of the conversation time talking in a conference room if there's discussion points or things like that. Maybe in an area where you don't have to be as close. It's not as loud. So, great question. Does that help?
Like good practical answers there as well. That there are ways to deal with this situation. And that the agency is open to doing those things.
Yep.
On to our next question. How many dairy plant specialists have you got now? And I guess this is a two-part. How many roles are unfilled?
Great question. So we have had a retirement recently. We just hired one dairy technical specialist, and one was hired about 5 weeks ago. So we're going to have 3 very young new dairy technical specialists. The one vacant position right now is in the hiring process. So hope to have that person on board right after the first of the year, and we'll be full staff at that point. Currently, we actually have 7 now. During the last year, we actually reallocated a position, and we had 6, and just for capacity, we did add a position there. So we're going to be up to 7 and at full staff here in January.
Okay. Yeah, for the record, WCMA is advocating for DATCP's continued funding at current levels so that we can maintain those specialist positions. That's something we've been loud about for years now, and will continue to make a priority in the next budget cycle.
Appreciate it.
Next question. All right, here's a what if. What would happen if you didn't have enough inspectors? What if a lot of them were going to have to self-quarantine for a while, or people up and quit? What would you do?
Well, currently it's we are following CDC guidelines. Every day our staff self-assess. If they find that they have some symptoms or they're not feeling well, even if they don't have that 100, what is it, 101, or the temperature, they are self-assessing, and we are asking them to do that. We do follow the guidelines, so if they've had a significant exposure, they are quarantining for 14 days, although I think CDC went back to 10 in certain situations, and our HR is looking at that, but we're still quarantining for 14. We are prioritizing all grade A work first, so anything for IMS listing purposes is going to get done. We are evaluating workloads every month, actually about every 2 weeks. We're looking at it because we do have staff that we are quarantining pretty much at a constant pace. At this point in time, we're able to cover all work. I've got a great team. They're willing to cover. We shuffle areas a little bit. So if we've got an area where somebody is quarantining, we look at workloads, and we have staff driving in to cover the priority work. We don't have very many grade B farms anymore, but obviously that was, bottom of the workload list right now. Grade B facilities that don't have any grade A aspect intake or anything like that are going to be a little bit lower, just so that we can make sure we can ship milk. But yeah, right now we are getting all work done. So we're meeting the work requirements.
Well, congratulations, because that's been a challenge, I know, and we certainly appreciate the extra effort of those folks who are covering other areas. And a good reminder to all of us, when we have an inspector we might not know well show up, they're there probably for a good reason, and we should extend to them any courtesy we possibly can. Just a quick note on that, the temperature level that anyone would consider fever is 100.4. So if anybody's still out there doing those temperature checks, and I know some are, just keep in mind it's 100.4. Another question. Is there any part of the state you'd currently consider a COVID-19 hotspot? I asked that question having seen the maps myself.
Yes. We're not. So I think everybody realizes right now, FDA is not doing any field work, or very, very limited field work. The federal standard is if a state or a county is red, they are not sending staff into that county or that area. Currently, for the state of Wisconsin, we are looking at a lot of that. A lot of our work, like I said, farms, haulers, tankers, a lot of that work is outside, or we can social distance really well. And that's one reason we asked about having staff call ahead, and to kind of take a check of the plant and know, geez, we've got considerable people out right now. So if they call ahead, and even though it's it's red, if the dairy industry is doing a great job tackling COVID issues within their plants for the most part, what we're seeing. And so we're calling ahead. If the plant's not reporting much, staff are going in and doing those inspections with masks. The Outagamie and Brown County there was a real rapid explosion almost of numbers in those counties at that point, and we're watching for that a little bit. But the other thing we learned real quick is when we do see those spikes, by the time we start to respond to them, they're already starting to come back down within a few days. It really is a spike up and back down. And so currently we are inspecting, and we are doing work in all parts of the state.
Great to hear. I mean, every county right now is red. And so much like the rest of the country, the state is a hotspot. Moving on to our next question. Is there any chance the department could do inspections remotely? I suppose this is sort of like what we're doing right now. Everybody is online. Is there any chance you can do that kind of work that way?
Some aspects we are looking at it. With COVID, like I said at the beginning, there's a lot of challenges, but it's offered us a chance to kind of look at things again. Do we need to send somebody in for like a manufactured food inspection in that cheese plant? Do we need to be there a day and a half or 2 days? Or can we start asking for electronic records? Can we look at some of that stuff ahead of time? So when we are at the plant, we can target that time just to be in the plant looking at the facility itself and the flow of products. And we can do label reviews remotely. We can do food safety plan reviews remotely. Some of those aspects, when it gets to like a licensing inspection or the actual components of actually being in the plant, walking through, we did do some licensing inspections that we followed up with in person then when we were able to get back in the field. And we did find it's very difficult to actually do a regulatory inspection with an iPhone or some kind of camera, digital camera. It's difficult. And
well, let's hope we don't have to come to that then.
Yeah, but I think there is opportunities for us to do some things remotely and to help speed up or limit the time that we have to tie up people in the plant. So I think there is opportunities in the future. The one thing.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I was gonna say the one thing that we're finding is not all plants keep all their records electronically yet. So there's still a lot of paper records and hand charts, things like that. Temperature charts or things that are handwritten. So that's one thing that makes it a little more difficult. We've asked a couple plants and they're like, well, do you want us to scan everything? We're not in the plant, but we're adding more work to the plant. So we're trying not to do that either. So.
That's good to know. Now we've come to the end of the questions that were submitted in advance of this. We did receive one while we've been talking, and that is, we at our plant have updated our visitor sign to include a temperature check and recording it. And if you're free of COVID-19 symptoms, so they ask yes or no questions. When an inspector arrives, are they exempt from filling out those questions in our visitor log?
Technically, yes. One of the things that we saw early on, and I don't know, I don't see this one obviously, but some of them said that the information is going to be kept, and or there's statements that you shall report back if you've had symptoms within 30 days or a certain amount, certain days. I think it was beyond the 10 or 14 at the time. And that's one reason we're pushing real hard that our staff are self-assessing every day. We are, if there's any issue, we pull them out of the field. We're not, no, they don't have to. Some staff, I think, are letting people, you can take their temperature, but anytime you start to record it and keep track, that's when we're saying no. So,
yeah. So some human resources and privacy concerns there.
Correct.
Okay, it's helpful to know. Now we're going to take a moment. I'm still happy to field any questions. So if you'd like to submit any via chat, we can definitely pause the rest of the presentation and go over those. But in the interest of making the most of our time together, we're going to move into a review of some industry resources that are available to you right now. We're going to start off with something that's sort of exciting, I think, offered by the Wisconsin Department of Ag, Trade, and Consumer Protection. It's their new dairy services site. And Tim, maybe you would like to highlight a couple of features. I'll happily chime in with a couple of my faves too, but Excellent. Why don't we click through to the website itself, Ellie, so that we can scroll around there for a minute.
And while she's doing that, historically, I think anybody who's used the website in the past, it was licensing was in one area. If you wanted to know about, one of the things that was very difficult was dairy is a food. So you had to actually go into the recreational or food restaurant licensing to find the map for the dairy technical specialists. It didn't make sense. And so we started to look at it and we wanted a landing page just for dairy. And that's what we really came up with here. And so if you bookmark it, that's what it's meant for, is to be just bookmarked. There's resources. If you start on the left side going down, we haven't put a lot of updates in on there yet. We haven't really made that a habit yet, but we're going to do that. We're going to start looking at dairy resources. If you go down there for dairy processors, milk producers, there's fact sheets, policies, procedures, lots of good documents there. And then the Dairy Rules Advisory Committee, we do have some links to other task force. If you or advisory committees, things like that, those are there. There are then also frequently asked questions, and we're going to start building those out. I think the best thing that we like is if you go to the right side of the page, is really a list of of mailboxes and contact info. Oftentimes people aren't quite sure who to contact with a question, and a lot of times they call me or Steve Ingham, and we redirect. And so with this, if you go right in, you can go in and see if you have some licensing questions or things like that. You can go right to Eau Claire, the dairy technical specialist. If you've got a question about a pasteurizer, equipment review, or any kind of, you can go down the list right there. You can send your questions right into that mailbox. The mailboxes are manned every day, so somebody's responsible to be looking at them, and we try to get responses back out within 24 to 34, 36 hours, somewhere in there. A day and a half is about what we're really asking for, maybe 2 days, but it depends on how technical the question is. So
I think the site is really easy to follow, and there's a wealth of resources available there. Forms that you're going to need, and again, those contacts. We also get those calls, and I always welcome them. But if everybody took 10 seconds after we're done here to just bookmark the DATCP Dairy Services page, you also have those direct links to people who are going to get you the answers that you need. We're always here to help you with that too, and we know who those people are. But it's great that the department has made those resources available to everybody, and we just thank you for that redesign, and it's much more user-friendly now. So thank you, Tim.
You're welcome. I will add too, if there are things that we can do to further improve it, I appreciate any suggestions.
Terrific. And we do have some other industry resources to share with folks right now beyond DATCP. I don't know if we can pull that up. There's just a couple that we want to quickly breeze over. One is WCMA's COVID-19 resources site. So we have been maintaining this since, I think, March 13th. And every day we add new materials or updated materials. So while you're getting our emails probably, and you're getting regular phone calls from myself and John, you also have those resources available to you right on our website. The front page will direct you there. There's also a tab at the top. And we cover a variety of things. We want to be comprehensive for all members. So we do start with general information, and then we break it out. So there are dairy processing operations resources. Some of those are fillable forms. Some of them are fact sheets. We have a list of current temporary regulatory flexibilities, both at the state and federal level. Business aids and employer resources. A lot of those employer resources really relate to the workforce side of things and some of the HR questions that are most commonly asked. We also have a number of printable posters that may be helpful either in sort of expressing your thanks to your workforce that comes in every day and does their essential and critical work. And some of it is informational, whether people are having some struggles either with their own health or their physical health or their mental well-being. There are resources available, and some of those things have been widely used in industry. So we encourage you to make use of that. In partnership with the Center for Dairy Research and with our friend at Dairy Farmers of Wisconsin, WCMA has a Dairy Food Safety Alliance, and that alliance has come up with a couple of standard operating procedures that are currently in the process of being updated. So we're going to be sending those out very soon to you within the next couple of days, and letting you know how to operate now when you have a suspected COVID-19 positive individual in your plant, or when an employee does test positive for COVID-19. As everybody knows, we have seen updated CDC guidance on our quarantine lengths. While 14 days is still recommended as best possible practices, we understand that is not always practicable either. And so there are alternatives that allow people to return to the workforce after 7 days and a negative COVID-19 test. There are also an option to return to the workforce without a COVID-19 test after 10 days. So we're updating those. You're going to see those in upcoming newsletters and bulletins. So just to flag that, that's coming. Wisconsin did adopt those CDC guidance updates on December 4th. Next slide. Similar to WCMA, the Center for Dairy Research and Dairy Farmers of Wisconsin maintain COVID-19 resource pages. And so you're welcome to check those out. We will send out this PowerPoint following this presentation. So all of these links are available to you, including that DATCP Dairy Services page, which you can bookmark in just a couple of seconds. And then finally, I want to note that the Department of Health Services has great resources available. There's a lot of information on the DHS page, so we do try to highlight the materials that would be most beneficial to members in our communications products. But I will say that the printable posters are very helpful. There are flowcharts that are easy for your employees to follow in terms of their procedure if they have come into contact with somebody with COVID-19. So those printable posters for employers are great. There's also some good employer guidance in general about how to set up your COVID-19 plans. I know many of you already have, and that's appropriate at this point, 9 months in. But if you're looking to review that, to brush it up, it's something that we're looking for constant improvement in industry on everything, including on our protocols related to COVID-19. So there are resources, there's help available. And the last thing I would say is that we're available to you. John and myself have our cell phone numbers posted in every single communications product we put out. We are available to you 24/7. And that has been real. We will take those calls on the weekends. We will take them in the evenings. And kudos to Tim Anderson because the department has done the same. And they have been great partners in making it work even in difficult circumstances at some times. Is there anything else that you'd like to close with, Tim, before we wrap things today?
No, I appreciate the time today.
Well, we appreciate your partnership, your expertise, and your ongoing communication. It's been outstanding. It's not something that we see in every state where members operate. And so we thank you very much for that effort. Folks, we'll make sure that some of this information is sent to you via email. And again, if you do have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact any WCMA staffer via email or phone. Thank you so much for your time today and for your support and engagement with WCMA.